Hello guys, my name is Piros and today we're going to see how we can publish a domain event using Dapper. First of all, let me show you what I have here. I have an API, and inside my domain folder and inside my common folder I have an entity abstract class which has an ID. I have an aggregate root abstract class which inherits from the entity and also implements the iHas domain events. The iHas domain events interface has a list of iDomain event, and the aggregate root has a read-only list of domain events and a pop domain events method which returns the domain events. And I also have two aggregates, the item aggregate and the order aggregate. So in my item aggregate I have my item as an aggregate root which has a name and a quantity. And because in our application when we place an order we can only have one item, for decreasing the quantity we have the decrease quantity method which decreases the quantity by 1. And then we have our order, and it only has an item ID, and when we create an order we assume that we place an order, so we add to our domain events a new order placed domain event which has the item ID. So in our controllers we have two controllers, one for the item for creating and retrieving the items, and the orders controller for placing an order. And we are using mediators, so we have in our orders a place order command in which we inject the iOrders repository and the iItems repository. We retrieve the item by its ID, we place the new order with that item, and then we add it to the database using the orders repository. And for handling our order created event, we have the order placed domain event handler in which we get the item by the ID of the event, and then we call the decrease quantity method, and then we use the items repository to update that item. Now both of our repositories are using entity framework. So if we go to my repositories, I have an EF items repository which use the entity framework, and the same for the orders repository. And in my appdb context I override the save chasing async method, and after I persist my changes I publish the events. Now probably you use an interceptor for that, or a middleware or a pipeline behavior if you're using mediator. But that's beside the point. The point is that whenever we want to publish our events, we use the change tracker of entity framework, which tracks all the entities that have changed. So we use that to get the ones that implement the iHas domain events, and then we get the domain events from there. So let's run it really fast to see that everything works. I will open Postman and I will create a new item. With the name ice cream and the quantity of 10, I will create that. I will get all my items, and let's take the ID and place an order with an ice cream. So let's place the order, let's hit send, and now if we get our items again, as you can see the ice cream has a quantity of 9. So all that works because we use entity framework. But if I change the EF orders repository with the Dapper's orders repository, so Dapper orders repository, and as you can see in here I'm using Dapper, so I create a connection, I execute my SQL, and then that using statement will dispose the connection. But the problem here is that we can't access our domain event. So what we are going to do is a simple solution. We will use our own class to keep the aggregates that have been changed instead of the entity framework's one. So what I am going to do is I'm going to create a new class, and I'm going to call it aggregate root change tracker. So aggregate root change tracker, and in here I will have a list of, or let's say a queue, so a queue of aggregate roots, and I will call that aggregate roots, let's say queue, and let's initialize that to an empty collection. Okay, let's also create an interface from that. So let's see. Okay, now let's go and register that so we don't forget that later. And we will register that as scope because we want a new one for per request. So I aggregate root change tracker, and the implementation will be the aggregate root change tracker. And now I'm going to my Dapper orders repository and I'm going to inject that aggregate root change tracker. So I'm going to say private read only I aggregate root change tracker. Let's call that tracker. And now when I add an order or update an order, etc., I will manually add that order to my tracker. So I will say tracker.aggregates roots queue dot enqueue, and I will pass the order. You can hide that aggregate roots queue in a private field and expose that to a property or a method, but we will keep it simple here. And now the next step is we are going to our application, and inside our commons folder I will create a behavior. So I will create first a behaviors folder and then my behavior, and I will call that transaction behavior. So transaction behavior. Okay, let me copy and paste some stuff so you don't have to see me write them. Okay, and now I will inject my aggregate root change tracker and the iPublisher from Mediator to publish our domain events. Okay, let's make that method async. And in here we want to start a transaction, so start transaction, and in the end we want to commit that, so commit transaction. We are not actually going to start a transaction. There is plenty of documentation about that using Entity Framework or Dapper online. And generally we want to wrap all that flow, like saving something to the database and then publish the domain events around the transaction. So if one of those operations fail, all the flow will fail. Now let's first capture the response. So we'll say var response equals with await next. And now I'm going to say while aggregate root change tracker dot aggregate roots queue dot try dq, and the output would be an aggregate, so aggregate root. Okay, and now I want to iterate through the domain events of that aggregate root and publish them. So I'm going to say for each domain event in var domain event in aggregate root dot pop domain events await publisher dot publish, and I will pass the domain event and the cancellation token as well. And finally I want to return the response, so return response. And you can also have some interfaces as marker, so you can separate what is a command and what is a query, so you don't start a transaction if you want to query some data. So the final step is to register that behavior. So I'm going to go to my program.cs and I'm going to say builder.services.add, let's say transient, and the type of iPipeline behavior, and the implementation will be the type of our transaction behavior. So let's try that now. I'll open Postman, I'll order another ice cream, and now we should have 8 ice creams left, and indeed we have 8. And let's put some breakpoints to see how that works. Let's go to my Dapper order repository, let's put a breakpoint in here and another one to our transaction behavior. So let's try to order another one. And we hit our first breakpoint. Now as you can see, our aggregate root queue is empty, but now we will add the order and now it's not empty anymore, it has our order. Let's hit continue. And now we are inside the for each loop, and as you can see, our aggregate root is the order, and now our aggregate root queue should be empty since we dequeue that, and it is empty. And now we'll iterate through the domain events, and as you can see, we now have our order placed domain event. We will process that, and now if we go back and try to get the quantity of the ice creams, it will be 7. So that was all. The base idea is to manually track the aggregates that created, updated, etc., because we don't have any framework to do it for us, and you can go with other implementations as well. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching and have a nice one.